So thank you so much for joining us. Uh, I am Paola Yuspa-Abud. I'm president of Top of Mind PR. We are a boutique public relations agency with practitioners across the US. We represent professionals, service providers with a concentration in law firms, real estate firms, and nonprofits, and others. Myself, I'm a former reporter and have been practicing public relations for a decade. As communicators, we spend a lot of time crafting media strategies and pitching stories. But the rules of media relations have changed significantly in the last 12 months. Media outlets that once were super influential and dominated the conversation have lost ground. But yet, they're still very important for thought leadership and credibility. So things are not as black and white as they used to be. With this webinar, we want to answer two questions. What's the state of the media? And how do we adapt our strategy to stay ahead? So the webinar had three parts. Jessica Forrest, our executive VP, will go first. Then you will hear from Courtney Moberly Moreno, our account manager and digital marketing leader. And I will come back for the last part. In the meantime, feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to them following the presentations. Jess, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Paula. So as Paula mentioned, we're going to start off with the evolving media landscape. So as you probably all know, the media is very crowded these days, and it's more challenging than ever to stand out. Audiences are constantly bombarded with media from multiple sources, making it harder to capture and retain, people's attention. And then over, the last 6 months, news coverage has been heavily focused on politics, overshadowing other topics. This trend is most likely going to persist over the next 4 years, making it more difficult for niche issues to gain mainstream visibility. So before I move on to the next slide, although I don't see slides, the presentation, we wanted to give a poll and just to see like how you're consuming media. And I think Courtney is going to issue that poll. Here we go. So if you guys can take a moment and answer the questions, I want to see if my points hold true in my next slide.
Okay, we have some results pouring in. We'll give you guys all just another second to answer. We have, where do you primarily get your news from? And then also what social media platform you're using most for your news. So just a few more seconds and we'll close that poll. Okay, so we actually have a 50-50 split on where you primarily get your news. 50% of the people who responded said through social media. Oh, we just had another entry, so we're now at a little bit of a higher split on reading an online publication. So 60% said reading an online publication and 40% said through social media. And then for which social media platform you're using most for your news, 60% have said LinkedIn, 20% said Instagram, and then 20% said Blue Sky.
Great. So to my next slide on, this kind of proves that, media consumption habits are changing and people are consuming news across different platforms, from reading publications to social media. And it also, according to a Pew Research study, it's also people are reading news, based on different factors such as gender, age, and political affiliation. So with gender differences, according to this study, women represent a larger share of regular news consumers on platforms like Nextdoor, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram. And in contrast, men dominate platforms such as Reddit, X, Rumble, True Social, and YouTube. And then age trends, younger audiences are more likely to consume news on platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, X, and Reddit. compared to other sites with older demographics. And then there's platform-specific trends. Some platforms cater to unique demographics. So, for instance, nearly half of news consumers on WhatsApp are Hispanic. And then meanwhile, LinkedIn attracts the highest percentage of college educated users, with 55% holding a degree. And of course, this one's pretty obvious, is there's, it's spread out or fragmented, by political differences. So you have a majority of news consumers on Truth Social and Rumble identify as Republicans or Republican-leaning independents, as do half of those on Facebook and YouTube. And then in contrast, platforms like Instagram, WhatsApp, TikTok, Reddit, and Nextdoor attract more Democrats. And news consumers on X are nearly evenly split between the two parties. However, within like the last 3 months, there's been a shift of X users moving over to Blue Sky, which is obviously attracting more Democrats. So with that said, and Courtney's going to talk more about this in her portion, but it's going to be very important in this new media world to have an omnichannel approach. Moving on to the next slide. We have, misinformation and disinformation are here to stay and will probably worsen as a result of artificial intelligence, like in tools like ChatGPT. So they've made it a lot easier for bad actors to create and spread, misinformation and false narratives. So, in this environment, it will be crucial to prioritize outreach to news outlets that are widely trusted by Americans. And according to a survey conducted by YouGov.com, their news, these are the news outlets that Americans trust the most. So like one is the Weather Channel. Apparently, that is like one of the most it is the most trusted news channel. So if you get your organization on the Weather Channel, then amazing. And then it goes like to BBC, PBS, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, ABC, etc. And then, of course, like the least trustworthy is like National Enquirer, InfoWars. You have HuffPost on here, Daily Beast, Fox News. And then, also we're seeing, a shift toward personalization in media. So audiences are prioritizing immediate personal concerns over broad long-term issues. So, while, large-scale topics remain important, people are more engaged with content that addresses their everyday challenges and interests. So like personal relevance, effective messaging must connect broader issues to individuals' lives to capture their attention and encourage action. And, to stay relevant, media strategy should blend big picture narratives with content that speaks directly to individual concerns. And then also, within this trend is the rise of newsfluencers. So within the last 6 months to a year, we've seen the rise of what they're called as newsfluencers. And these are social media influencers posting about news. So in fact, a Pew Research poll taken during the 2024 presidential campaign showed that 20% of Americans now get their news from social media influencers on various apps. And I'm sure, I don't know, one news influencer that has really gained significant following is Aaron Parnas. So you need to start creating, adding news influencers to your media relations strategy and outreach and begin pitching them. And then we've also seen this trend of journalists who may still be working at an outlet, but then they have created their own sort of outlet through Substack. And you can sign up for sometimes they'll provide free content, or like you can sign up and there's a subscription fee. So this area will be really interesting to follow like in the next year or so to see if it sticks. And of course, we all know that that newsrooms are shrinking. This has been happening for like the past decade, maybe even longer. And then, there's a high turnover in journalism. And then last but not least, you can't, this new media world, big tech's influence, big tech is having a huge influence on news distribution, and say they're playing a major role in shaping how news is accessed and consumed. They have algorithmic control. And, there's ongoing tensions, recent, incidents on platforms like Facebook, TikTok, and Google, underscore, friction between tech companies and political stakeholders. And the news consumption now is, more scattered than ever, with audiences accessing content through various channels. So to effectively reach target audiences, media strategies must consider the diverse ways people engage with news across multiple platforms. So now I'm going to pass it over to Courtney, who's going to talk about adapting to the new media reality.
Thanks, Jess, for that look at the evolving media landscape. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney, and we're going to be talking about the strategic adaptations needed for communication in today's fragmented media environment. As we just heard, the media landscape has transformed dramatically. Traditional channels have been supplanted and in some cases supplemented by a multitude of digital platforms, each with its own audience, norms, and engagement patterns. For professionals across industries, this transformation demands not just awareness, but strategic adaptation. So we're going to be going through some actionable frameworks to help you navigate this complexity with confidence. So first up is developing an omnichannel approach. This is probably the most fundamental shift in media strategy from single channel to omnichannel. So visibility today requires presence across multiple platforms. Being featured in a prominent newspaper or trade journal is no longer sufficient. Your audiences are scattered. They're across traditional and digital channels, and your communication strategy has to reflect this reality. This doesn't mean, don't stress, you don't have to be on every single platform that there is, because there's a ton, but you do need a thoughtful, integrated presence across the channels where your stakeholders are gathered. An effective omnichannel approach has three key elements. So the first of those is going to be strategic channel selection. That means looking at where your specific audience are, where they're most active and where they're most receptive. So for some, that might mean a stronger emphasis on LinkedIn and industry publications. And for others, it might be more consumer facing, leading you to Instagram or TikTok, especially if you're trying to reach those younger demographics. Next is content adaptation. So each platform has its own format requirements, its own audience expectations. So that technical white paper that you write for your website has to be readjusted for LinkedIn, and then it has to have a completely different approach for video platforms or social media. And then the last point is cross-platform amplification. So this is where many organizations may miss opportunities. When you secure that valuable media placement or publish that insightful thought leadership piece, you need a coordinated plan to amplify that across the different channels. And so while new platforms are emerging constantly, traditional media does continue to play a crucial role in establishing credibility. The key is just finding the right balance. Traditional media is still going to carry unique weight in terms of perceived credibility. Being quoted in the Wall Street Journal or featured in an industry publication will always signal a level of authority that's harder to achieve through your own owned channels. But now those traditional hits are no longer end goals, they're launching points. Each media mention should be amplified across your digital channels, extending the reach and lifespan of that coverage. When you secure that valuable media placement, implement a deliberate strategy to maximize its impact. Share it across your social media platforms, add thoughtful commentary that adds context relevant to each platform's audience. That amplification not only extends the reach of your earned media, but also reinforces your credibility by associating your brand with respected publications. And the last point we're going to talk about here are newsletters. These are a particularly powerful tool right now for your omnichannel strategy. They deliver your messaging directly to the inbox of your target audience. That includes past clients and referral sources, bypassing the unpredictable algorithms of social media platforms. With a well-curated newsletter, you control the timing, the presentation, and the context of your content. This direct channel allows you to highlight earned media coverage, share thought leadership, and maintain consistent communication with key stakeholders. Most importantly, newsletters create a sense of exclusivity and personalization. It fosters deeper engagement than a lot of the other platforms. The takeaway here is a reminder that you don't have to be everywhere, but you do need a coordinated strategy that leverages each platform's strengths while maintaining message consistency across those channels. So with that in mind, with the proliferation of channels, there's also an increasingly sophisticated audience segmentation that creates both challenges and opportunities. It's no longer a one-size-fits-all approach to communication. Even within professional audiences, preferences and information needs vary dramatically. The technical expert, C-suite decision maker, and the implementation team all require different framings of the same core information. This means developing modular messaging that maintains consistency while allowing for customization by audience segment, platform, and context. And the last thing that we're going to touch on is building media relationships. While channels and tactics evolve, the fundamental importance of relationships and media engagement is constant, but the nature of these relationships has changed. Journalists and content creators across platforms face increasing pressure to produce more content with fewer resources. This creates opportunities for professionals who can position themselves as reliable, responsive resources. The most effective approach isn't going to be just pitching your agenda, but becoming a go-to expert who helps media professionals do their job. That means you have to be available for quick comments, provide useful context, and respect the reporter's deadlines. Building those relationships, it's outside of just building a media list and sending them occasional pitches. You should be following key journalists on social media platforms and meaningful engaging with their content. Share their relevant work outside of just where you're mentioned. Provide useful insights and tips with no expectation of immediate coverage. It's a long-term relationship builder. And understand their beaten audience so that you can suggest actually relevant story ideas and angles. This now also extends beyond what we think of as a traditional journalist to include a wide range of content creators. So you should be looking at podcast hosts, newsletter writers, social media commentators, and industry analysts. Each of those relationships requires a different approach, but all benefit from authenticity, reliability, and genuine value exchange. These relationships are going to develop over time. So the reporter that's covering a trade publication today may be at a major outlet tomorrow, and that podcast host with a small audience might grow into a major industry voice. Treat every media interaction as the beginning of a potential long-term relationship rather than a transactional exchange. So we've gone over a few strategies that provide a foundation for effective professional communication, but implementation requires both strategic planning and tactical execution. So help us to understand putting these principles into practice, I'll hand over to Paula, who will guide us through the tactical implementation for professional success.
Great. Thank you so much, Courtney. I'm very excited about this next part. It is packed with great tips to help you become an expert source and secure more earned media coverage. Okay, so one thing you can do for reporters is provide rapid response when news break. This is one of the best ways to get quoted. When news breaks, share a quick reaction quote or statement that reporters can drop straight into their stories. This is very effective, especially since they don't have time to read long press releases. They're on deadline, very tight deadlines. Maintain prepared statements and expert commentary for timeless issues that continue to get coverage. To do all this, you have to stay alert. You need to monitor the media. You need to know when news breaks and act quickly. Okay, thank God we have AI as a great collaborator. So don't be shy, use AI tools to build your media list, to maintain those lists, for media monitoring, pitch personalization, to spot trends, to come up with angles that are timely, to measure sentiment and impact analysis. And of course, it's super great for content repurposing. And we're going to discuss that a little bit later. So when you are developing a strategy to position your company as a thought leader, be very mindful of your content strategy. Don't leave out letters to the editors, op-eds, turning blog posts into pitches, columns. You can take your LT, your op-eds, and then you can turn all that into byline columns. Reporters, as you know, newsroom have fewer reporters today, so publications are always eager to receive third-party columns and content. Another great tool that we have developed in the last 12 months, because reporters are so busy, we realized that instead of us going to reporters, we are bringing reporters to us. And this is a tool you may want to try if you're not already. It's hosting virtual press briefings. You can share this a good opportunity to share insights on industry trends or explain new laws, court rulings. Reporters really value this format so they can understand a topic and then go out and write about it. If you can, when possible, bring in multiple voices, bring in a panel of experts, and make the discussion richer and more engaging. And of course, it's going to look less self-serving if you have multiple panelists. This format is very easy for reporters. They can attend, they don't have to drive, they don't have to worry about parking, about time. They come, they take notes. Those who are unable to attend, we send them, or you send them their recording for them to grab quotes or catch up on what they missed. But this is content that you created that now they have and they can use. So these tools really build trust over time. When you consistently offer valuable insights, reporters will come to you again and again for commentary. They will see you as an expert source. Okay, building relationships, like everything in life, is very important to develop strong relationships. And one way to do that, one tactic is setting up reporter meetings. We can do that when the report is local, But what about when the reporter is in New York and DC? So try to find, if you, for example, you're based in South Florida, but you're going to be attending a conference in Washington, DC or New York City, you're going to be there. So go ahead and call reporters in those markets and say, hey, I'm going to be in the area. I'd like to have some coffee with you. And that is a great opportunity to have a face-to-face meeting, to introduce yourself, introduce your company. And these meetings may not result in a story, but in the long term, that reporter will call you and say, hey, I remember when you told me this, and I'm writing about this topic at the moment. And make sure you follow up. You have this in-person meeting and then follow up from time to time. Hey, hope everything is okay. Let me know if there's anything you need. But keep that relationship growing. Another great tip is tying pitches to current events and high-profile examples. Tie your pitch to what is happening at this moment that is relevant to reporters. There is like a national, like a scandal, like a lawsuit, like a recall, whatever is now dominating headlines. Try to mold your pitch to speak to that topic. Be strategic in framing your pitch, positioning your story within the context of high-profile cases, and people will bring more eyes to that story. So you are going to have a larger audience. And come up with media-friendly angles. That's another thing. Be aware of what the community people are reading at the moment, and come up with an angle that fit that. Give the reporter what the public is interested in consuming, and then the reporter will respond. Okay, another is creating the narrative for reporters. Proactive storytelling is key. Don't wait for reporters to figure out if your pitch is good. Do I have a story here? I don't. Give them the facts, the context, and framing right from the start. So the reporter reads the pitch and go like, oh, yes, I have a story. And help them help you. So share data, expert quotes, and background info that they can easily use in their reporting. Doing all that, you will become the expert that they will call. When you position your organization as a trusted source, reporters will turn to you and you will have a say in how the story is told. They will grow to trust you and pretty much, I don't want to say repeat what you are offering them, but they will be pretty, it's going to be pretty close to that. Repurposing material for greater impact. You always hear work is smarter, not harder. And this is a great example. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time you pitch a story. Turn what you already have. You have an op-ed, you have letters to the editors, or you have blog posts. Okay, turn that into media pitches that can lead to more coverage. Repurposing content is key because it keeps your messaging consistent and saves you time while maximizing your efforts. Okay, and then incorporating multiple voices in pitches. That's very important. Make your story more compelling by bringing in voices that matter. Not just your company, not just your CEO, not just your spokesperson. Bring other people that complement your messaging. to the narrative, to the pitch. Think like a reporter. Journalists seek multiple sources. They're always looking for multiple sources to provide balance, balance and context. So offering that will make your pitch more appealing. And do you want to reach more people? Then include diverse perspective into your pitches. Show how the issue affects different groups and help you connect with a wider audience. So the more sources you can offer, the more perspectives you're going to have, and more people are going to be interested in that story. Well, this brings us to the end of the presentation. I know we have a few minutes left, so feel free to send your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And I know, Courtney, you're monitoring the questions.
Yes, I am keeping an eye on those questions. So as they roll in, we'll be able to start going through them.
Awesome.
Don't be shy, guys. We're here to help. If you have any questions, now's the time.
I know we provided so much information and it's hard to process all this, but we are going to be sharing this webinar. We're going to host it on our YouTube channel. We're going to send it out on our eBlast as well as social media channels. So make sure to, if there's something you want to take notes, if you want to transcribe this webinar, feel free to do so.
And that's a great example of an omni-channel approach in action. So yeah, we had a question, will the recording be shared? Yes, it will. Okay, and we have our next question here. How do you get reporters to notice your pitches? Jess or Paula, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, well, a little bit kind of what we just discussed. First of all, if you can tie it to a current events and use the current events as the news spec and use this big name, we just, news broke that whatever, Messi, he's going to be moving to Miami, blah, 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 blah. Then if you can use that little piece of information as a news peg for your pitch, which is going to be about something different, but somehow related, that is going to get reporters' attention. And also when you provide, multiple sources and the storyline makes sense, right? And it is current, and it's not obviously self-serving.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you want to provide something new, to add, a new voice, a new idea, something that, maybe they're not thinking about.
And a great tip, that's when AI becomes very handy. I mean, if there is a story in the paper or in the magazine or whatever, you can run it by AI and say, hey, give me an idea of a different angle, to pitch this topic, using, my expert source as one of the commentators or, so, don't, like I said before, don't be shy to use AI to help you think differently or to add depth to your strategy.
Okay, and then our next question is, do you change your outreach strategy when reaching out to newsfluencers? So I can jump in here. I think that the answer is yes, definitely. They obviously operate a little bit different than a traditional reporter would. So for example, there's a lot of different news accounts on Instagram now that are run by news influencers. And so I would reach out to them via DM, rather than maybe, going through a traditional email approach. And then you also want to make sure that you are actively engaging in their content and understand their content. That's much in the same way that it happens with a traditional reporter as well. But being a consistent presence in their comments, liking their posts, supporting their work. If they have a Substack, subscribing to their Substack, all of that goes a long way, in helping to create that personal connection and then making you a little bit more recognizable when you're reaching out to them with story ideas.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here too. So like for example, there's this reporter in DC that, he's a radio reporter at WTOP, and which is a talk radio for those of you who aren't in DC. But he also has like a Substack that just covers national security. So trying to find those newsfluencers that are they may not, their regular beat may not be like say national security, but then, they'll still cover your news. So, and then you can pitch them like a regular reporter, but just knowing that like they may have a totally different Substack or, that has nothing to do with their beat in regularly.
Great. Okay, and then another question just came in. Have you used some of the new social media channels like Threads and seen more engagement? Um, I can jump in on this one. I think that we're at a very interesting time right now in the evolution of social media and digital media. Much like traditional media, it's very fragmented. We saw this big exodus from X, and it kind of sent people scattering through Blue Sky and Threads. There's a variety of platforms now. So it's kind of trial and error, and it really depends again on where your audience is. You have to meet them where they are. So, consistently monitoring these different channels, keeping an eye on who's active where, and, trying to find where some of your counterparts and competitors and your target audiences are spending their time on social media can really help you inform your social media strategy.
Yeah, and to add to that, right? So, you want to meet your audience, where they are. So, I mean, if you are trying to reach, the, conservative leaning audience for, I don't know, it could be a product or it could be, maybe an issue, like an advocacy issue, like, right, you're not gonna, you're probably not gonna, I mean, you could still post on Blue Sky, but you change that messaging, but you're probably gonna post on X or True Social. So really thinking about where your audience is, like, so if you're trying to target women, and maybe Nextdoor is going to be the better platform.
Okay. And then the next question that we have is, how do you find relevant news influencers?
Well, I think that's the challenge that we're all facing at the moment. Um, So, I mean, because right, we use a journalist database, and they're not necessarily in there. So you have to be active on social media. Like I was scrolling through TikTok last night, and like some news influencer popped up, and I didn't know who she was, but she had a good following. So now I'm gonna like reach out to her. Um, so, and then it's also like, sometimes you can see, so this one journalist I was referring to in DC, like at the bottom of his signature, he's like, oh, you can also follow me on my Substack. I forget what his Substack's called. So also looking at like their email signatures, because sometimes they'll promote their Substack. Oh yeah, like this one Forbes reporter, he writes on climate issues, but he has his own Substack called like Climate Laundry, and it's in his signature. So I never, I can pitch him there as well as for Forbes. But yeah, they're not, I don't think, journalist databases are that, haven't evolved yet. I'm sure they will, but it's going to be your own research, just like with podcasts too. I mean, there are podcast databases, but yeah, I mean, you have to listen to it and make sure it fits.
And again, I'm the queen of AI. You always can use ChatGPT or any AI tool to ask. It's all dependent on what you ask, but I'm looking for a new influencer in the space of real estate, commercial real estate, and you may get some results. And also, don't be shy. Sometimes, I ask my client, so tell me about your social media habits. Well, what are you reading? Or do you have favorite podcasts, or who are your news influencers? And I figure if he's reading those influencers, then I should be positioning him in front of those influencers so they know about him. So yeah, I wish we had like a very simple answer, but at this moment is you have to be resourceful, creative, and just come up with different ways.
Old school research.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also research.
Boots on the ground. Okay, gonna do another last call for questions. If you have any questions, now's the time to get them in because we have the last couple of minutes here. So any last questions, go ahead and get those in. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and answer. What is a way that you keep law clients top of mind with so many law firms in the same space? So how do you differentiate against competitors?
That's a great question. I mean, right. So again, you need to capitalize on news, but then also you need to be, especially with law firms, you need to be really creative, because a lot of times you have, litigators who can't comment, like they can't talk about their cases. A lot of stuff is settled, or, confidential. So with law firms, you really need to be creative. I'm trying to think of an example, like, so you see, like, we have return of office, right? There's all these mandates, but there haven't been any stories on, one, how could it affect custody agreements with parents going back to the office, or another one, like, what is how should employers like comment on, or like go about with, like, you know, I guess, go about, like, you have a lot of these, Gen Zers that have never worked in an office before, right? So like, what advice are you giving, say if it's an L&E attorney, giving to employers to like bring these Gen Zs back, because maybe they don't understand, like, they didn't have to deal with sexual harassment, right? Like, because you're on a computer. So really trying to connect the dots, and it just being really creative, so you get them in stories, but it's
And
creativity for the most part.
yeah, and just to chime in here too, not to keep pointing back to our presentation, but this is where those relationships really come in handy. So, if you're constantly out there serving as a resource for the reporters, even just talking on background to give them information on a topic, even if it means that you may not end up in that specific article, and just continuing that relationship, being responsive, being available by a reporter's deadline, all of that goes a long way for that long-term relationship building, so that the next time that they have an article that they need a source for, they'll go to you first. So that the relationship building really does play a big role in, the ability to set yourself out from the competition.
And also, it's not giving up. I mean, sometimes we send pitches, we very often, pitching our lawyers, and we don't hear back, from a report maybe a year later, right? Just how many times we
Oh my God. I
"Oh,
once heard back from a reporter
percent."
6 years later, and I was like, well, this attorney doesn't work at the firm anymore, but I can put you in touch with another one, right? So yeah, I mean, they hold on to your pitches, and you have to stay top of mind. You have to stay top of mind with reporters, really.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for answering all of those questions, and thank you to the audience for submitting such great questions. That is going to bring us to the end of the Q&A portion. Paula, if you want to.
No, I just want to remind everybody, please see us as a resource. If you have any question on how we can help with media relations, digital media, please reach out. You can email us individually, or you can email us at info@topofmind-pr.com, and we will all get that email. Anything we can do, we're here to help. See you next time.
Follow us on social media, visit our website, and stay tuned for the recording.